Good morning, students. Today we are going to start this chapter, Nationalism in India, from your history book. We had already discussed a lot of things relating to this chapter. We shall just quickly revise the main points of this chapter and then we'll go to the civil disobedience movement. So let's start. See, we have to begin with the term nationalism, which means loyalty and devotion towards nation. And in India, this very feeling of nationalism came along with our fight against the British government. Means this anti-colonial movement, which was launched by different groups of people, right? And how the movements like anti-colonial movements like non-cooperation movement launched by Mahatma Gandhi and civil disobedience movement led to a building up of a united force against the British. Okay, and it will also help us to know how different social groups participated in movements. See, it is also very true that different sections of people had perceived the meaning of Swaraj in their own way, and though they claimed that they were following Mahatma Gandhiji, but very often it was found that their way of doing their or carrying out their movement was different from the one what the Congress had approved or what Mahatma Gandhiji had spoken of. Okay, so the First World War. See, the First World War created a new socio-economic, socio-political situation in the country. It played a very important role in shaping the freedom struggle, Indian freedom struggle, and developing new modes of struggle. See, there were problems because of the First World War. What were they? There was a sharp rise in the defense expenditure due to the war. Led to the increase in taxes. Custom duties, income taxes were introduced for the first time, prices and introduction, okay, to war loan that was there. Through the war years, prices increased, okay, the prices of commodities increased, doubling between 1913 and 1918, leading to extreme hardships, very difficult times for the common people, right? And in 1918 to 1919 and 1920 to 1921, crops failed in many parts of India. So, resulting in acute food shortage. There was a extreme, situation that people were facing. There was an acute shortage of food. It took a heavy toll on life, right? A lot of people lost their lives. The war created resentment among people of India against the foreign rule. Though they expected that the British would do something to improve the condition, but their expectation was in vain. So there was a widespread discontentment against the British government, against the foreign rule. The idea of Satyagraha. See, when Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa, he was very much emboldened by the idea of Satyagraha, which he had implemented there in South Africa as well, where he was fighting against the color apartheid system, right? We have heard of Nelson Mandela, who was the leading global leader against the fight of color apartheid. Okay, we studied that in class 9. So the Satyagraha, we basically have to understand that it's a novel method of mass agitation without using any kind of violence. Okay, no violence will be there, and it is basically appealing to the inner conscience of the oppressor, and it is based on the premise that even a devil has a heart. If we are in a situation to appeal to the inner conscience of that person. Even the hardest of hardcore person might change their heart. Okay, so here we have to also keep in mind that we don't have to seek vengeance. Vengeance means any kind of um, feeling of taking any revenge should not be there, and we can never afford to be aggressive. We should not be aggressive. A satyagrahi could win the battle through non-violence. Mahatma Gandhiji believed this dharma of non-violence could unite all the Indians. Satyagraha movements, we discussed this earlier as well. In 1916, Gandhiji organized Satyagraha movement against the oppressive plantation system in Champaran, Bihar. Right? The planters, what they did, they were forcing the peasants to grow indigo, which they resisted because it was very, very unprofitable for them, and they were supposed to grow indigo at a time when they were forced to grow indigo at a time when they were supposed to grow or remain busy with the rice cultivation. Okay, so there was a blue rebellion also that happened, and Mahatma Gandhiji stood in support of the peasants against their fight, uh, in their fight against the plantation system. Then in 1917, he organized a satyagraha to support the peasants of Kheda district of Gujarat. He demanded, what were the main demands? The revenue tax owing to the poverty. Sorry, the word that is written there, that is incorrect. It is owing to the poverty experienced by the farmers because of the outbreak of plague and crop failure. Since the crop failure was there, outbreak of plague was also there. That was adding salt to the wound. So the poor peasants of Kheda district of Gujarat, they were unable to pay the revenue. So they wanted the government to waive off the revenue. In 1918, Gandhiji organized a satyagraha against the cotton mill workers in Ahmedabad. Now the demands of cotton mill workers were for higher wages. I mean, the wages that were being paid to them, that was very low, and the working conditions needed to be improved. Okay, the Rowlatt Act. See, the Imperial Legislative Council had hurriedly passed this act, and according to this act, no political activism or no political freedom can be allowed to Indians. Indians cannot form political parties, they cannot raise their voice against the government, they cannot criticize the government, right? They cannot hold rallies or can do any kind of campaigning. So all kind of political activism had to be stopped by this act. So Indians resisted, right? And this act definitely gave government enormous powers, huge powers, to repress political activities, and it also allowed putting the people behind bars. Those who are leaders, they could be put behind bars. Political prisoners, uh, detention of political prisoners would be there without trial for 2 years. There was a widespread opposition against Rowlatt Act, right? Rallies were organized in various cities, workers went on strike, railway workshops, and shops were closed down. On 10th April 1919, in Amritsar, widespread attacks on banks, post offices, and railway stations took place after police fired upon a peaceful procession. Soon after this, we get to hear the Jallianwallah Bagh massacre, which happened on the 13th April 1919, right? See, after the widespread protest against the Rowlatt Act, the British government had imposed martial law in cities. So the people, those who were gathered there at the Jallianwallah Bagh ground in Amritsar, they were unaware of the martial law that had been imposed. And somehow the government came to know that some satyagrahis are secretly meeting or having some meeting there, and doing some planning. They might be doing some planning against the government. So getting the information from somewhere, uh, General Dyer reaches with his soldiers, and he closes the entry and exit of the ground and kills hundreds of people, right? Many satyagrahis were forced to rub their noses against the ground, and women were also very badly beaten up. So, seeing the violence spread like that, where the Jallianwallah massacre, post this Jallianwallah Bagh massacre, Gandhiji called off. He stopped the movement, the ROWLATT Satyagraha movement, after seeing this violence. The non-cooperation movement, see, Mahatma Gandhiji tried to convince the leaders within the Congress that we should start with the non-cooperation movement, as he believed. He wrote also in his book Hind Swaraj that if we stop cooperating with the British would not be able to rule over us, right? So there were people from different sections of the society. They participated in the movement with their whatever understanding they could have about the call that Mahatma Gandhiji had given. If we talk about the educated middle class that led the movement in towns and cities, educational institutions, law courts, and foreign goods were boycotted. Peasants organized movements against talukdars and landlords in villages under the leadership of Baba Ramchandra. As I said, Baba Ramchandra is earlier also I discussed this. Baba Ramchandra is he himself was an indentured laborer who came from Fiji. Okay, and when he came back to India, he decided to mobilize the peasants and stand as a force against the company, because and they were their main demand was mainly to eliminate the oppressive system of zamindari, to eliminate the BAGH system. BAGH system is the system of bonded laborism, in which a person would remain tied to harsh working conditions at a landlord's place, and he or she would be working without any payment, right? And he or she would have to go through some exploitationist measures of the employer. Okay, just as what used to happen with the indentured labor, the contractual labor in different plantation areas in different parts of the world. Okay, and we will also talk about the perception of different communities, different societies, different sections of people. As I said, that educated people and professionals, they left their practices, they left universities, colleges, they left the government titles. Okay, they boycotted it. They boycotted foreign goods, clothes, and peasant movement was there. We've heard of Nai Ban, Nai Dhobi Ban also. Under the Nai Dhobi Ban, what they did, the barbers stopped cutting the hair of those people who were talukdars and zamindars, and the Dhobi Ban was there. They took a resolve that they would stop washing the clothes of the zamindars and talukdars, right? When they heard the call from Mahatma Gandhi, they thought that we are not supposed to pay rents, and they started looting the shops of talukdars. They started looting their granaries, right? Even started using violence. So this was something which the Congress did not approve, right? Though Nehru along with Baba Ramchandra went from village to village to get support of the peasants against in their fight against the British. Okay, but the peasants had taken it in a different way, and they without understanding the call of Mahatma Gandhiji properly, they started using violence. And then there was an incident of Chauri Chaura, which happened in the year 1922 in the district of Gorakhpur, Uttar Pradesh, where around 22 policemen were burned alive. And it is after this incident Mahatma Gandhiji decided to call off the movement. He also thought that these satyagrahis need to be trained more, because they become aggressive, they start using violence. So to be a true satyagrahi, one needs to be well trained, and we were talking about the you know efforts of Mahatma Gandhiji to convince the leaders within the Congress and other political party leaders to start the non-cooperation movement. But only the Justice Party, which was the party of non-Brahmins, it did not go for it. It thought that we can assume power, or we can make changes only by assuming some political power. For that, they needed to contest elections, so they contested elections, the Justice Party. Okay, differing strands within the non-cooperation movement in towns and cities. We had discussed this. The movement started with middle class participation. Educational institutions, law courts, and the council elections were boycotted. Foreign clothes and other goods were burnt in bonfires. Khadi was promoted. Sorry, Khadi was promoted. Liquor shops were picketed. The effects of non-cooperation movement on the economy were dramatic. There was a huge effect on the economy. Rebellion in the countryside, in the Gudem hills of Andhra Pradesh, where the tribal peasants, they also were very annoyed with the company, with the government, British government, because they were not allowed to move freely through the forest, because the British had imposed certain laws, certain forest acts, under which they were not supposed to roam freely through the forest, right? And several other policies also they had enacted, like the enrichment plantation, under which they would grow some commercial crops, and the area where commercial crops would be grown would be cordoned off, would be protected from entry by the tribals. So tribals were very unhappy because they were being denied their basic rights of entering the forest and using the forest produce. Okay, and we have to also mention the name of Alluri Sitaram, who was the tribal leader, and he claimed that he had supernatural powers. He could do anything, and he was very much impressed by Mahatma Gandhiji's ideas, and he only differed from Mahatma Gandhiji at the point that Mahatma Gandhiji believed in non-violence, and he says that without using violence we cannot win the battle against the British. Okay, the tribal movements, this is what I just discussed just now. In the Gudem hills of Andhra Pradesh, tribals started a movement under leadership of Alluri Sitaram Raju. Tribals wanted to get back the traditional rights over forests. The method followed by the tribals, because they were actually expert in guerrilla attacks. Okay, so in their efforts to fight against the British, they could not imagine that it could be fought without using the violence. Okay, so they followed the violent methods. Simon Commission, yes, very important. And we have to remember one more section of people, those who uh, understood the call of Mahatma Gandhiji for Swaraj in their own way. Of course, we have to talk about the plantation workers, those who worked at one place, remained tied to at one place, and they would not be allowed to go to their villages, to go to their homes, because of the Inland Immigration Act, right? And they had to take written permission from the authorities to reach their homes, to go to their villages, but very rarely they would be given such permissions. So according to them, the call for Swaraj by Mahatma Gandhiji meant going to their own villages, and where they could own their where the land would be redistributed to them. They could plow it, cultivate it, and thus could live a normal life, unlike the one which they were living there in a concentrated area, right? Like they were living in a concentration camp. Okay. Simon Commission, it was constituted by the Tory government under the pressure of mass movement in India. Sir John Simon was a chairperson of Simon Commission. It looked into the demands of the nationalists and suggested changes in the constitutional structure of India, because the British government had seen the 1857 revolts, and seeing that, they were afraid also that we have to soon make some changes in the constitution, so that people don't raise their voice so fiercely, and They were also apprehensive of growing discontentment among the people after the First World War. So they thought of and seeing the non-cooperation movement um, in different places, right, and different groups of people raising their voice against the government. They now thought that we have to make some changes in the constitutional structure of India. But very surprisingly, in this Simon Commission too, like the Rowlatt Act which was passed, there was no Indian member discussed. In this Simon Commission also, no Indian member was discussed. Right? Congress and Muslim League, along with other parties, received the commission with the black flag and slogans such as "Go Back, Simon." Lahore Congress of 1929. Now, the Congress session that was held in Lahore in 1929 under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Congress declared Purna Swaraj as its aim, complete independence. It was decided to celebrate 26 January every year as Independence Day. It was decided to start the civil disobedience movement to win Purna Swaraj. Now, civil disobedience movement, Mahatma Gandhiji found in salt a powerful symbol that could unite the nation. For this, he sent a letter to Viceroy Irwin stating 11 demands. Great Depression made the life of people highly miserable. Lahore conspiracy case and Meerut conspiracy case created discontent among the Indians. Gandhiji inaugurated the movement by breaking the salt law at Dandi. You've seen how under the non-cooperation movement there was another movement also going alongside, that was the Khilafat movement. The two brothers Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, and the Muslim world particularly, they were unhappy with the possible harsh treaty that could be imposed on Ottoman Turkey. After the defeat of Ottoman Turkey in the First World War, the Khalifa, who is the head of Islamic world, he had to step down, and harsh conditions could be imposed on Ottoman Turkey, which they were protesting against. So Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali and Gandhiji met, and they started the non-cooperation Khilafat movement. That I just did not discuss that earlier. So in this particular session, I am discussing that. So here civil disobedience movement started when, as I said that in the beginning also, Mahatma Gandhiji made it very clear that if the non-cooperation movement doesn't become successful, then we have to go for a full-fledged civil disobedience movement where we will start breaking the law. And he, at that time, Mahatma Gandhiji, when he thought of taking the support of the Khilafat movement people, he thought that Hindus and Muslims could be brought together under one umbrella. And here, because there were communal tensions also, from time to time we heard of communal riots as well. And in case of breaking of salt law, what does this mean? The British only had the exclusive right to produce salt, right? So this was something which had to be violated, so that it could send a very strong message to the British government. Okay, so and Mahatma Gandhiji saw in salt something that it would unite all the people, because salt is something which is the essential food item, and whether rich or poor, everybody would need it. The salt march started. The government imposed heavy tax on salt. Moreover, the production of the salt was a monopoly of the government, so the price of salt was very high. Therefore, Gandhiji opposed the salt law. Gandhiji decided to inaugurate the salt march. Gandhiji and 78 of his trusted volunteers started a march on foot from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi. On 6 April 1919, they reached coastal town of Dandi. Gandhiji prepared salt by using seawater, broke the salt law, and inaugurated the movement. Difference between non-cooperation and civil disobedience movement. See, basic difference is that in non-cooperation we just stop cooperating with the government, and in civil disobedience we start breaking the law, we start violating the law. So let's just go through the main points. People refuse to cooperate with the government during the non-cooperation movement. People break the laws during the civil disobedience movement. Muslims participated in large numbers in non-cooperation movement because there was Khilafat movement also, and Muslim participation in the civil disobedience movement was very less because there was a slowly the Muslim participation was low because of the lukewarm support from the Congress. No tax campaign was there in the non-cooperation movement. People refused to pay taxes in civil disobedience movement. Limitations of the civil disobedience movement. See, Dalits did not participate in the civil disobedience movement because they were not moved by the abstract concept of Swaraj. And many Muslims also did not participate. They thought that the Congress was moving close to the Hindu Mahasabha. Communal riots occurred in many places. Industrial worker participation was minimum. Gandhiji declared that Swaraj will not come for 100 years if untouchability was not eliminated. There were several efforts made by Gandhiji for the upliftment of Dalits, right? And women participation, if we talk about, then we find that a large number of women actively participated in the civil disobedience movement as well as in the non-cooperation movement. But we see that most of the women were from the high caste families in urban areas and from rich peasant households in the rural areas. For a long time, the Congress was reluctant to give any position of authority to women within the organization. The Congress was keen on the symbolic presence of women. And they only wanted, for the sake of women only, for the namesake only, they wanted women to be there, but women for a long time they did not hold any important positions within Congress. Only the women who belong to the so-called upper classes, rich classes, they held the positions. Okay. Now, this sense of collective belonging, this is something which is, our very bond with the nation. Nationalism spreads when people begin to believe that they are all part of the same nation, when they discover some unity that binds them together. We are talking about that bond, and we discussed that in the beginning of the chapter also. This sense of collective belonging came partially through the experience of united struggles. Additionally, a variety of cultural processes also captured the spirit of nationalism. Identity of the nation. The identity of the nation is most often symbolized in a figure or image with which people can identify the nation. As we have seen in Germany also, the allegory of Germania, and in France too, the female allegory was there, and right. So these allegories are there to associate a nation with, and the image of Bharat Mata was a pictorial representation of, yes, I was talking about the French allegory, the Marianne, right? The image of Bharat Mata was a pictorial representation of the motherland. Vande Mataram, the national song, was written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in 1870s. This was sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. Different artists projected their own versions of Bharat Mata. Folklores were there. Many nationalist leaders took help of folk tales to spread the idea of nationalism. It was believed that the folk tales revealed the true picture of traditional culture, and many novels were also written to spread the idea of nationalism. Right? National flag, a tricolor flag, was used during the Swadeshi movement. There were 8 lotuses on it which depicted the 8 provinces of British India. There was crescent moon on the flag which represented Hindus and Muslims. It was designed in 1921. So what conclusion we draw from this? The Congress under leadership Mahatma Gandhi tried to channel people grievances into organized movements for independence. Through such movements, the nationalists tried to forge national unity, and many diverse groups and classes participated in these movements with various aspirations. Different groups of people had their own developmental goals, aspirations. In other words, what was emerging was a nation with many voices wanting freedom from colonial rule. There were different voices, but their aim was common. That was to free ourselves from the British rule, because the common enemy was the British. even though we had different demands, different specific demands were there, different goals were there. Now, one thing I would like to mention in the end, when we were talking about the limitation of civil disobedience movement, the groups of people who did not participate, one was the Dalits. They did not participate, the reason being because the Dalits always feared that the Congress was more close to the upper caste Hindus, right, the Brahmins, and thinking that only, they thought that if after India becomes free, then there would be Brahman Raj again, and they would be dominated over. So for that reason only, they decided to stay away from this civil disobedience movement. So for that, they demanded a separate electorate. Separate electorate means only the people of that particular caste will vote their particular caste people. Okay, like Dalits would vote Dalits. Are you getting my point? So likewise, the Muslims were also demanding the separate electorates. Separate electorates they were demanding because they thought once India becomes free, since this is a Hindu majority place, after it becomes a nation, right? After it becomes independent, the Hindus would dominate over the Muslims. This was the fear that was created among the Muslims, and they thought that since they were also very unhappy with the sudden calling off of non-cooperation movement by Mahatma Gandhiji, so they decided to stay away from civil disobedience movement. Okay, and see, Mahatma Gandhiji had staged a dharna also for this, when Dr. Ambedkar was demanding for a separate electorate. Then a Pune Pact was signed. Under that, it was agreed that reservation would be provided to them, and the same thing happened with the Muslims also. They were ready to leave their demand for separate electorate if a reservation for the council elections is kept for them. Okay, so we understand that though different groups of people participated, but with their own aspirational goals, and with their own perceptions of what Mahatma Gandhiji had advocated for. And we've seen how Mahatma Gandhiji tried to channelize the support of people, mobilize the support of people, right? So though there were different voices, but ultimately, as I said, there was a common enemy that all of us had to fight against, which was none other than the British, right? So it is through the united struggle, we would say, that the ideas of nationalism strengthened. Thank you so much.